Good morning, my beautiful babes and babettes. I am your resident active advocate, and it's cold, kind of. Not cold enough to snow, thankfully, but because I am Canadian, woohoo, I will sit here and whine about it anyway. Or, alternatively, we could talk about the movie Holes, which, until a few days ago, I did not know was a Disney property. Now, my best friend slash advisor and I have both read the book and seen the movie. I personally think that the movie is better than the book. You will almost never hear that statement from an English major, but this is the very, very, very rare exception for me. My best friend slash advisor and I do not agree on this, but we're willing to politely leave it as it is. Both the book and the movie contain a wonderful little thing called intersectionality, which we really like on this channel. For those of you who have not seen my videos, plural, on this, or for anyone who needs a refresher, intersectionality is a very long word that refers to the literal intersections between two or more minority groups. Okay, so if you are not part of the cisgender, heteronormative, white, male, 6-foot-ish, English-speaking, quote, norm, then you may be subject to intersectionality. Intersectionality being when you are, say, disabled and, or black and, or in some cases, depending on who you talk to, female and, right? So an example of an intersection that can be found in this movie would be racial diversity mixed up with social disability. This is present in almost every single character in this movie. I want to make clear that social disability does not necessarily refer to something with which you are born, something for which you have a genetic predisposition. A lot of people are born because of heritability with a genetic predisposition to a thing like depression, but not necessarily with behavioral disorders of any kind. The basic plot of this movie is that there is a kid, he's rather poor. His name is Stanley Yelnats, which Yelnats is Stanley spelled backwards, which is why he was named Stanley. But he is arrested at the beginning of the movie for stealing a pair of shoes, but this did not actually occur. He is innocent of the crime of which he was convicted. He had a choice, though. You can either go to jail or you can go to Camp Green Lake. So for Stanley, his two intersections would be living in poverty and being overweight, at least in the book he is. In the movie, he's not. He's played by Shia LaBeouf. All right, and I don't know how good the casting was on that. The casting for almost every other character in this movie is par excellence, however. So the reason why the sneakers were important is because they belonged to a famous, in that universe, baseball player, and they were being auctioned off to help the homeless. And when this crime is pinned on Stanley, as I say, he had the choice to either go to prison or to go to Camp Green Lake. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There is, however, a very, very, very large desert where a lake used to be, and all of the kids are set to digging holes as a character building exercise. I really, really encourage everyone watching this, if you haven't done so, to both read the book and see the movie. Do both, okay? Because they do differ in parts. But when it comes to digging holes, you know it's not just for character building. All right, so spoilers, obviously, for this whole thing. But Stanley finds that he is surrounded by boys who actually would be considered as having behavioral disorders. There are a lot of kids who are very aggressive. There are a lot of kids who are very moody. There's one guy in particular, least in the book, not as much in the movie, but he is portrayed as having mental health disorders in the vein of depression. You know, Stanley wakes up and hears him crying in the night and doesn't want to say anything to him because the whole facade of this camp is that everyone is tough and hardened, and you know, they all kind of get along as minor criminals. You know, they all just kind of want to be part of this boys club of, look how tough I am, look how much better my crime was than yours. I stole a pair of sneakers. I stole a car. Oh, you think that's bad? I tried to burn down someone's house. You know, and so on and so forth. However, Stanley meets a much younger than the other boy's boy named, well, his real name is Hector, but everyone calls him Zero. At this camp, by the way, when you have been established in their hierarchy, you are given a nickname. And you go by that name, no matter what your real name is, from then on in. So, pretty early on, Stanley is given the nickname of Caveman. It's not exactly clear why. There was an instance in the book where he found a fossilized fish in the middle of the lake that they're all digging up. And maybe that's where it came from. But he's also very big, as I say, in the book. So there's definitely this whole idea of big guy equals tough guy, right? And that's not necessarily true to life. You know, the whole trope of the gentle giant. That exists for a reason. But when it comes to Stanley and Zero, but I want to call him Hector. Let's call him Hector. When it comes to Stanley and Hector, they kind of hit it off, but not so much in words. Hector, for one thing, does not know how to read because he was born into a very poor family, staggeringly poor. And he vaguely remembers living in a house, but for the majority of his young life, he has been homeless. And he was never educated in how to read. He can do figures in his head like crazy. So I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word crazy. He can do figures in his head like you wouldn't believe. So it's like, give him two numbers and he can multiply them together like that. That might be some kind of a reference to something on the autism spectrum, but not necessarily. Some people are just really good at that. Like, I know for a fact that I don't have any hint of ASD, but I can kind of do the same sort of thing if you give me two rather basic numbers, put them together. It's not like 128 times 526. It's not like that. I can't do that. But you know, like 5 times 6, 30. That's a bad example. But Zero, Hector can do the same thing. Just with numbers. With words, however, he doesn't like talking to people either, which was why he was given the nickname Zero, because as one of the camp counselors says, there's nothing going on inside his stupid little head. I think that that is particularly insulting, especially if he is assumed to have an intellectual disability. This fits into the whole hierarchy of tough guy, though, because people with disabilities are often framed as not being capable of being the tough guy. Again, not true. They obviously can be. I have seen cases of wheelchair athletes, for example. There was a guy who, I believe I was in high school when I saw this, but he could do bocce ball. If y'all don't know what that is, it's like you have a few large balls that you throw to try and get close to this little ball right in the center of a field kind of thing. And he was not only a wheelchair user, but he also had no arms. He could do bocce from off his shoulders. I have no idea how this guy did this, but he was an Olympic level athlete to the point where it's just like he would roll his shoulders, sort of bounce the ball off of it and get it right there. And it was incredibly impressive. And this isn't a case of super crip either. This is a case of you are born with natural gifts, And if you are taught how to exercise them, you will be capable of doing so, no matter to what degree you are disabled or society perceives you as being disabled. So that is the case with Zero as well, Hector as well, because right before departing from the camp, he very nearly strangles a guy to death who had been bullying Stanley. Hector, by this point, has become very close to Stanley, who has also offered to teach Hector how to read in exchange for Hector digging part of Stanley's hole every day. Hector is the fastest digger at the camp, probably because he's the smallest person there. So, he can move more quickly than all the other big, brutish boys can. But, he's very good at digging holes. And when they're doing some round table camp counseling, one of the counselors says, goes around and asks everyone, what do you like to do? When he gets to Hector, Hector just says, I like digging holes. And leaves it at that, because he doesn't like to talk about himself. Hector, though, is not really a very descriptive case of a social disability in this movie. A lot of the other boys have much worse social disabilities, shall we say. Just because Hector is introverted doesn't mean that he is, quote, zero. So when it comes to some of the other boys, especially at the top of the hierarchy, you see a lot of the people who are most proud of the crimes they have committed. You see a lot of the people who use brawn over brain in order to keep their place intact. And, I believe it's X-Ray who's at the highest tier of this hierarchy that they have. And X-Ray, his real name is Rex, and X-Ray is just Pig Latin for Rex, by the way. I don't know whether they go into that in the movie, but they do in the book. And I believe he gave himself his own nickname, and then he was the one responsible for giving nicknames to everyone else. So when the poop hits the fan, shall we say, and Hector runs away from camp, and off towards some very distant mountains that they can see through the haze across the lake, Stanley decides, I have to go after him, and the problem is, back at camp, they are both assumed to be dead because no one runs away from Camp Green Lake. There are no fences, there are no dogs, there's no one keeping watch, there's no guards with guns. They don't need them because Camp Green Lake is a desert. It's in the middle of a very wide desert, and there's no water around this place. They have the only water for, 50 miles in any direction. So Stanley kind of assumes that Hector is running off to his death, and everyone else assumes it too. But the thing is, with the counselors and with the warden, they all say no one cares about Hector Zeroni. So they erase his files. We'll get back to that. They erase his files and pretend that he was never there, just in case there's an investigation of the blatant child abuse being carried out at this camp, because I may have forgotten to mention, but every single inmate there is a young male. They're not of age yet, none of them. And they're all being forced to do hard labor in the hot sun all day on very little water and very little food. All right, I want to talk about the warden. The warden is the woman who looks after the camp, or nominally looks after the camp. Her only interest is in finding the legendary treasure of Catherine Barlow, who was, in this story, one of the greatest outlaws to ever grace Texas. So Kate Barlow had hidden her treasure in this desert, and the warden is a descendant of the person who had wanted to marry Kate Barlow, but Kate refused him, therefore he killed her, shall we say, boyfriend? He killed Kate's boyfriend, whose name was Sam, and who was also black. This incident happened more than 100 years ago, back when American law did not allow for interracial marriage. the line about it in the book is, he kissed you, so we have the right to hang him. And she says to the sheriff, who makes this claim, well, then you'll have to hang me too, because I kissed him right back. And he says to her, no, 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 no. It's only illegal for him to kiss you, not for you to kiss him. So more intersectionality is at play here, because Kate Barlow, after she sees Sam being murdered by the guy who had formerly asked for her hand, she, I really don't want to use the term goes off the rails, because she's not crazy. She's, she's extraordinarily depressed. I don't believe in the concept of crazy. There's this whole idea of, if you have such and such a mental health disorder, you're automatically branded as insane. And I'm really not fond of that term, because it shows a lack of understanding of what is actually going on within the psyche. There can be a diagnosis, but sometimes that'll make it even worse, because, say, especially with a thing like schizophrenia, if you hear voices, or if you have inclinations that seem apart from who you really are, people will brand you as, crazy, as nuts, as insane. And that, I think, is a diminution of the capacities of the brain, but also of the suffering that people can go through when certain disabilities are brought upon their psyche from the exterior. So this movie is also a very, very good example of how disability can be inherited from one's environment. Kate Barlow goes around Texas killing people and stealing their money, and she first kills the sheriff who had wanted to string up Sam. And you see this montage of her going around Texas killing people and stealing from them, but the whole time she's framed as, this horrible human being. Really what she's doing is trying to fill the horrible void that was left in her mind and in her life through Sam's murder. It was a very important relationship to her, and the whole idea of systemic oppression surrounds this movie to the core. Almost every single boy, I might mention, at the camp is some color other than white. Like, one of the guys, Armpit, he's like the biggest guy there. He's black. Hector is Egyptian, actually, you find out later. He's sort of portrayed in the movie as looking more Hispanic. So I don't know if that was a case of miscasting, but the kid who plays Hector is really, really good at the role. And one of the things I like best about this movie is the casting itself, because they're really good at portraying their respective characters. The woman who plays the warden, especially, she's really good at it, and I like her a lot. And the woman who plays Kate Barlow, I might also mention her. She's exquisite in how she portrays this sense of mental suffering, and she can never get over this loss, because everyone in her time period and in her state, in her part of the country, hated Black people and never would have allowed their relationship. Even if they had gone north, goodness only knows what would have happened there. The whole idea of America being split in half, north and south, over the issue of racism, that doesn't really come into the movie, but the fact that they live in the South and that systemic racism surrounds them from beginning to end, they have to keep their relationship secret, and when they're not able to, it's the racialized guy who gets it. But because of that, you see Kate Barlow taking this horrible, horrible emotional hit and becoming an outlaw because of it. So it really displays how systemic oppression can mess up both parties involved, all parties involved. This is also the case in the modern timeline in the movie because, as I say, the vast majority of the inmates at this place are some color other than white. And even in modern America, you see many more convictions among non-whites than you do among whites for equal crime, I might add. So in the modern timeline, the The warden who is looking after the camp is a descendant of the guy, as I say, who had wanted to marry Kate Barlow and who was responsible for Sam's murder. She is still looking for the treasure that her, I believe, great-grandfather had begun to look for. You know, before Kate Barlow dies by suicide, she says to him, Charles Walker, you will be looking through this lake for eternity, and your descendants will be looking through this lake for eternity, and you will never find that treasure. And then, because the town has already become, by that point, a ghost town, it's also infested by these creatures called yellow-spotted lizards. I don't know if these things exist in real life, but in the story, they are highly toxic. She baits one of them. Come here, sweetheart. It jumps right up on her, bites her, and she dies laughing. You know, that's how bad it can get, to the point where you would wish you were dead. You know, because of systemic oppression. And as I say, it affects all parties involved. It's not necessarily just a top-down thing. It's also the people from the top who are trying to lift up those who are on the bottom. And they can be subject to horrible treatment as well, because they're breaking up the hierarchy and you're not allowed to do that, and letty-do. In the modern timeline, though, as I say, Stanley goes out to find Hector, and he does find him lost in the desert, but heading towards the mountains. They go up the mountains, and Stanley has to carry Hector up, and because Hector's too weak to go by this point. But they can't go back to the camp. They'll be killed if they do, pretty much. So they stay on the mountains for a little while and recuperate with each other and share their family's stories. As it turns out, I have not addressed this yet, but Stanley is the descendant of a man who was friends with Hector's great-great-grandmother back in, what country was this? Latvia, in like Eastern Europe, okay? So when Stanley's great-great-grandfather is about to head to America, Hector's great-great-great-grandmother says to him, I want you to carry me up the mountain and sing the songs to me that I have taught you before you go to America. I want you to go to America. I think it would be a good place for you, but I want you to carry me up the mountain and sing to me the songs that I taught you. If you do not do this, your family will be cursed from here to eternity. The guy doesn't believe in the curse. You know, he's not as superstitious as she is. But as it turns out, Stanley's whole family line from that point on had been extraordinarily unlucky and had always lived in poverty. When Stanley carries Hector up the mountain, the curse is broken, because it's the descendant of one family carrying the descendant of the other family up the mountain and singing to him, because his family had passed down the songs that Hector's great-great-great-grandmother had taught to Stanley's great-great-grandfather. So the curse is broken thereafter, and it, I think, is a really good example of, you know, how people can work for one another and help one another in times of distress. And especially since this whole movie basically is about the idea of people being in unity with one another, and that will help us to overcome both our distress and our oppression. Not only does this break the curse on Stanley's family, but for the first time in over 100 years, rain starts to fall on Camp Green Lake. It's implied that because of Sam's murder there, the place itself had been cursed not to get any rain. And at that point, because of the act of kindness that is shown from one human being to another, the gods rearrange the skies and the rains start coming down on Camp Green Lake. I realize that the whole conceit of this movie does kind of promote superstition, but I kind of like it as a narrative device, because it's basically the heavens themselves saying, if you unite, if you are kind, if you are decent people to one another, you will all be benefited. Not just the oppressed party, but everyone involved in these scenarios. And I think that that is a very good case to be made for dispelling hierarchy and saying to one another that, yes, we are equals, yes, we are all here to support one another. So the movie ends happily, but I think the overall message is that, as I say, unity will overcome oppression, will overcome all of the things that we see as wrong, quote wrong, with one another. And there is a good case to be made for peace, being made just through simple acts of kindness. To be fair, Stanley does save Hector's life. That's pretty much established. He would have died out in the desert. So it wasn't exactly a small act of kindness, but it was the one that worked. And I think that in order to take down these hierarchies that oppress people and keep them in these condemned spaces, we need to just act out of kindness and general human decency towards one another. This is especially true in cases of intersectionality, because if you are in the center of two or more intersections, you're probably going to be part of some oppressed minorities, and that ain't fair. So that is, I think, a very positive aspect of the narrative of this movie. See the movie, as I say, and read the book. Decide for yourself which one you like better, because I prefer the movie. My best friend / advisor prefers the book. We can politely agree to disagree. All right, so that was my very long-winded movie of today. Not sure what we're talking about tomorrow, but I will figure that out. You will notice that this one was not an animated movie, but as I say, I didn't know it was a Disney property, and I really wanted to talk about it because it's that good. It's one of those mind blowers, for me, at least. So go and watch, go and read, and enjoy. Have a lovely day, and I will see y'all tomorrow. Mwah!